he was convicted of killing 10 people. And now the D.C. sniper must prepare to die himself. John Alam Muhammad has been given a date for his execution and the method by which he will be put to death.
With more on that story and details of other legal headlines today, we're joined now by Jack Ford of In Session. So they're given a choice, right, when they're up for the death penalty here, and when there's a method that has to be chosen about how they're going to die. So what was his choice?
Well, he chose not to make a choice here, Reggie. What happens is, in those jurisdictions where there are various methods available, the inmates, the condemned, if you will, are given that opportunity. It's interesting, a lot of people don't realize that there are a couple of jurisdictions in our country where there's still an electric chair. There are even a couple where there's still hanging or death by firing squad that are available options to them. But just about everybody chooses lethal injection. In this instance, John Alam Muhammad refused to make a decision, so the statute provides for him. If you choose not to, you will then automatically be put into the category of lethal injection. So that's where it stands right now. And as you said, his death sentence is scheduled for just a couple of weeks away. You remember that this case, back in 2002, you remember that up in this area, around the Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, Maryland, just extraordinary fear as a result of these sniper killings. I can tell you, I was actually with my son, who was in high school, down outside of Baltimore in a lacrosse tournament in the fall when all this was taking place, and it was fascinating. The players are playing on the field. All of the parents were watching away from the field, looking up in the area, looking literally for snipers, because there was such extraordinary a sense of fear that had taken over people. So this now, as a consequence of all of this, it looks as if, unless there's some sort of amnesty or somebody steps in, a governor steps in the end, looks like this execution may well take place very soon.
So his appeals, in other words, Jack, are done.
They are, Reggie, but there's always last-minute applications. There's always going to be a last-minute application to governors for some sort of leniency in terms of a sentence. If there's something that somebody finds, you can have a last-minute application to the court system, to an appellate-level court, saying, here's a new issue that needs to be resolved. So with regard to death penalty litigation, I tried half a dozen death penalty cases back in the days when I was a lawyer. With regard to death penalty litigation, essentially you never say the case is over until the execution actually takes place.
All right, let's move on to this other story today, Jack. This man in Rhode Island, from Rhode Island, who's been found guilty of killing his wife. This was a scuba diving trip?
This was a bizarre story and a very convoluted story here, Namwa. This man, his name is David Swain. He's 53 years old. His wife had died in a scuba diving accident down off a shipwreck in the British Virgin Islands. Now, originally it was deemed to be an accident. And then what happened is there was a civil lawsuit back in Rhode Island, family members claiming that this was not an accident, that it was staged as an accident, but that this man had actually killed his wife in the diving accident. The motive, they said, not a surprise. We've seen it before, another woman, and also not a surprise, we've seen it before, money, the money in her estate that he stood to inherit on her death. So civilly, he was found responsible, and that caused the government down in the British Virgin Islands to take another look at this. Well, they chose to charge him with her murder. And the argument was here that the claim was that he wrestled her from behind, took her scuba gear out of her mouth, damaged her mouthpiece. And they pointed to a number of pieces of evidence that the prosecution said substantiated that claim. And ultimately a jury, they have a different system down there than us. The judge presiding actually urged the jury to find him guilty at the conclusion of the trial. Jury of 9 members, they only needed 7. They came back and they said guilty. So he is now looking at the possibility of life in prison, on a prison they describe very graphically here as a horrible place on a hilltop in a mountain in Tortola, they describe it as. So it's one of those strange stories that had a tortured path, but ultimately resulted now back in the British Virgin Islands in a conviction.
And Jack, he's already been there for 2 years, right, at this prison?
Has been there for 2 years, and they say it's just a horrendous place. It conjures up images of these old-time prisons that pirates were thrown into in the 16 and 1700s in these islands. The description we have is fairly similar to that.
That is bizarre.
Wow.
Huh. And it's interesting to hear how their justice system works, with the judge essentially campaigning for a certain outcome in the trial.
Very different, and very different. And I always talk to people about our justice system, and you always hear folks that are complaining about it, and the comment is always, maybe it has its problems, but it's better than any other system out there. Believe me, and I've seen an awful lot of them.